Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from AlexMercedCoder.dev. Okay, let's move that a little bit over like that so you're not seeing where the green screen ain't covered. But basically in today's video what I want to do is just do some styling in React. So what I want to do is I have a plain vanilla create React app project generated here, and I'm just gonna like do some basic styling. So this is not like, I wouldn't say I'm like the biggest CSS expert in the world. I'm not a Kevin Powell. If you don't subscribe to Kevin Powell on YouTube, if you want to know all the nitty gritty about CSS, subscribe to him. He's the best. But especially if you're like a beginner and trying to pick up on a lot of like the typical sort of concepts of CSS, this may be a good video to watch. So just watching us build the thing and seeing some of the ways you can do things. Yeah, here we go. Okay, so I have a plain React project. So I'm going to assume here that you're familiar with React, familiar with HTML, familiar with the basics of CSS. Um, so in that case, I'm not necessarily going to be retreading all that ground. We'll retread some of it as we go along as necessary, but essentially this is going to be more about just sort of like different techniques you can use in sort of, again, taking advantage of the component-driven nature of React to create your app. So again, here's our React app. So I'm going to go put that off to the side. Then we'll put our code here to the side. So let's get that over to the side. Oops. There we go. That's what I want. Okay, we'll make this sort of small for now. Maybe a little bit bigger. Okay. So basically we have, again, there's our app components. So we're going to clear out our app components so that we're kind of starting off with like a fresh page. Okay. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to kick this off and really just make this a fragment. So that way we're starting off with like a real fresh slate. Okay, so there's nothing in the DOM. Okay, and I'm gonna just get rid of this for now. We'll see how we do our styling. First, what I want to do is I want to just set up some basic components. Okay, so I'm gonna create my components folder. So new file, not new file, new folder components. So that way I can hold all my components. And I'm gonna create certain components. I'm gonna create are more styling components. So I'm gonna create a folder, new folder called style. So these are components that are pre-styled, that are really more building blocks for building things. And then I'm going to create another folder that is more layout. Okay, so they say these designate certain sections of the website. Okay, and they're not necessarily going to have much. They're just there for semantic purposes. Okay, so I'm going to say new file. Let's create just our basic sort of layout. So we're going to have a header component, header.js, a new file main.js, and a new file footer.js. And the idea is that these components are really just kind of there to help block off sections of the website. So function, header, props, just your standard React component, return h1 header. Actually, we're just going to return a fragment. Okay, so it's going to return nothing right now. I'll just literally put the word header in there for now. Okay, and then we will export default header. Okay, and we're going to just do basically the same thing for the other two. I want to use VS Code's multi-cursor support. Yay for cool features. I just hold the Alt key, and I can change these all to footer, and then do the same thing for main. Main. Just use a multi-cursor. Main. And the idea is the main is going to represent sort of like the main section of the website. But the idea is that I don't necessarily want to create a lot of my DOM elements here. I really just want these to be sort of semantic wrappers for me to understand, like, hey, this is these sections of the website. Okay, so I'm going to head over to app, and I'm going to import these three components. So I'm going to import header, import main, and import footer. Okay, and then I can create header, footer, then in between that, main. Okay, so just makes it, again, when I look at the app component, it becomes really easy to kind of figure out, okay, hey, this is the top of the website, this is the main part of the website, this is going to be the footer, and then I'll go in there and start really kind of constructing my DOM. Okay, now when I think what I need, so see, I can see header, main, footer. Right now there is no like H1s or anything, so they're just going to all show up as inline text. That's literally all there is. Like if I open up my dev tools, Control Shift I open up my dev tools here, and we take a look at elements, and I take a look inside that div with the ID of root, literally it's just text, header, main, footer. So that's all that's there right now. Okay, that's fine. Okay, all fine and good. So now let's first do our header. But now I'm going to want some styled components to represent things I'm typically going to do. One of those things I'm going to do a lot is using like flexbox containers, because anytime I need a row, I am going to use a flexbox. Okay, so I'm going to create a new a container div, so that way anytime I need a flex container, I can just use we'll call it flex container because I might need a grid container going forward. So here we go. I'll say new file. We'll call this flex container. .js, and then we just create a function, flex container, props, okay, and let me just clear up some of this other stuff here. Flex container, props, we'll come back to that, export default flex container. Okay, so now for this one, essentially it's just going to be a div that acts as a flex container. That's literally all this is. Okay, but what I want to do is I want to make it where the user can customize the flex container if they need to. So first I'm going to just create the, style. I'm going to create a variable called styles. Okay, and that's going to equal an object, and I'll put my basic styles here because I'm going to use inline styling because I want it to be sort of one enclosed in the component, and again I'm going to take advantage that the user can pass me some of the properties if they want to change anything, and you'll see how I'll do that in a moment. Okay, so what we can do is we will set our defaults. So I'm going to say display. By default for this thing is going to be flex, and flex wrap will be wrap. And then we'll set a default width of 90% and a default margin of auto, so that was always like a centered block. And a default justify content of space in between, or space between. I think that's a good default. Now, how do we get the user to pass in their own styles? Well, they can pass in their own object, and we can then add those properties to this object by using the spread operator. So I can just be like dot 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 props dot styles. So we're going to assume that the user, if they wanted to overwrite my styles, they'll pass in a styles prop. And then I can pass in additional styling, and I can also pass in overrides. And that's why you need to put it at the end, because that's the way if I define a custom display or a custom flex wrap, like I change those properties, the way an object works is if you have two of the same property in the same object, the one on the bottom is going to override the previous declared one. So this way, make sure that the user ones take priority. Okay, so that'll do that. Okay, and then then we just return, and I'm just going to return a div with a style property or style prop of styles. Okay, and then again, I want anything that the user puts in between this tag to show up. So the way you do that, so if I want to say, hey, I want to be able to use like this flex container and say, hey, anything I put inside between the opening and closing tag shows up, what you do is you put props.children, because props.children is the prop that you technically don't declare. It's just kind of there because anything that's in the middle of the opening and closing tag gets passed in as props.children. Okay, so technically, and actually I don't need this taking up all this space. Okay, so what that's going to do is make it where stuff inside the tag will show up. So again, props.children is any child of the component element. So again, when you use those components as HTML tags, anything in the middle of the opening and closing tag is props.children. Okay, so there we go. Now I have this flex container, and anytime I need to use flex, I just use this component. So now let me go back to head or header. So if I go back to header, we can import container because I'm going to use the container. Container. Nope, that's not what I wanted. Import flex container. Okay, and we're going to say first off what I want. We're going to have two flex containers. One for like the title. So we're going to say flex container 1. Okay, and then again, we have to put in like some sort of child in there. So h1 will be title of website. Let's see how that shows up. Now, see, this one I want to customize because I actually want the title of the website to show up in the center. So I can use that prop. So remember I said, hey, we can pass a prop. So I can be like styles equals, and then pass in a different property for justify content. And say I want justify content to be center. And then again, that's going to override that default. Okay. Unless I wrote that wrong. Let me think about that. Justify content center. Well, let's just see how it took. Okay, so if I see here. Oh, because it's the container is centered. Oh, that should still center the elements. Let me just see here. Styles, object, object. It's fine. Body, display, block. Okay, so that didn't take the way I wanted it. So why not? Oh, because I wrote styles. It's supposed to be style. There we go. Now it works. Okay, because again, it's supposed to be the style prop. I wrote styles. Okay, cool. So there we go. So see, it's a flex container. Now I can see that. See, it's flex. I can see that here in the DevTools, and that's centered. That's wonderful. Okay, so that's all fine and good. And then I want another flex container for like the menu. Okay, we're gonna have like links. So I want maybe each link to be. We'll just make it a div. So let's say we have. Really, we're gonna want that whole sort of like vibe where you have like a home link all the way to the side, and then you really have all the other links over here to like the right. So really, in that case, I only want there to be 2 items at this level. So we're gonna create one h2 that's like the logo. We're gonna just pretend like imagine like there's a logo there. Okay, so see like there's a logo, and then we're gonna have another flex container off to the side. Okay, and that's where we're gonna put our links, because that flex container is technically the second item at that level, and then we can put our links that would technically, we'll use divs, but we'll say we would make those divs links, and would have like link 1, link 2 doesn't quite show up the way I'd like it to, but we'll think about that in a second. Link 2, we'll copy a couple of these. Let's see, okay, yeah, that's interesting the way that shows up. Let's see why. One's right on top of the others, but technically these are both children. So let me see here. If I go over here to the div, okay, if we open that up, we have 2 elements, and technically this should be a flex, but it's wrapping, so that's the issue there. So maybe that one I do not want to wrap. Okay, so let's try that. Really, I just kind of want to give this one a fixed width. That's probably what I want to do. So I'm going to go to this flex container, customize the styles on that one, and say width, let's make it 40%. And that's going to be a string, so 40%. Okay, and see now we're starting to kind of get the effect that we want. Something's still a little off there. Okay. It's probably still taking up that div's spreading out. As you can see, like it's not this div itself is not flushed to the right because it's centered. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just change the margin to none on that one. Margin none. Let me see if that fixes what I want. What did I not like? Marge styles. Oh, I put that margin none in the wrong place. Oopsies. There we go. Margin none. And that's a little bit better. Again, we have some alignment issues because, so in that case, what I want to do is I want to push that down because again, if I hover this over, I see now I'm getting the effect I want where the two things are being pushed to the sides. That's what happens when you use space in between in a flex box and you have two items in there, they both get pushed to the edges. So I get that effect where like the logo is on the left and all the links are on the right. But now I want to make sure I line up those links. I'm probably going to want those to be a little bit bigger. That I might use CSS. That I would probably do a CSS, but to push those down, what I can do is over here is I could put instead margin. Okay, when you put two numbers, the way it should go is that it's first top, bottom, and then left and right. Okay, so what I really want to do is push, and then technically if I do four numbers, it should be top, right, left, bottom, left. So really the only thing I want to change is that top margin. So what I'll do is I'll say 10 pixels, then space, 0, space 0, space 0, because I don't really care about the other margin. So that's a little bit better. Okay, let's actually really change this to like 30%, so that way it adjusts depending on what's going on. Well, that's too much. So let's see if we change that to like 5%. That's still too much. 3%. Almost, that's about close enough. So see, like that's lining up a lot better. Okay. And a neat thing you can do is like if you're trying, to make life a little bit easier, you can head over to your index.css and you just add this style. You just add like a asterisk, and then what you do is you just put like outline, and you put like 3 pixels gold. Okay, and what that's gonna do, actually let me make that solid. Okay, and so you get these lines so that way you can kind of see where all your blocks are. So I can see, hey, look, here's like my flex container, the first one with the title in it, and see there's like the H1 inside of it centered gold, and I can see, hey, this is my other flex container. Okay, and then I can see here I have this H2 over there, and then there's my other flex container being flushed to the right because of the space in between property on the flex box being pushed to the right. Okay, so I can see that, and that's pretty useful. And again, I can toggle that off whenever I want, so I can just either comment it out here, or I can go to my dev tools just to see what it would look like without it. I can just click it off, and I can use that to help guide me as I style the website. It kind of helps me just let me see more visually what these blocks are and how they relate to each other and where the spacing might be off, like what element is causing my spacing to be off. So oftentimes that's very, very helpful. Okay. And again, when I'm done, then I would just comment this out. Okay, so continuing on. So now technically I got the top, I got my navigation bar, but let's style that a little bit more. Okay. Now in the case, now here's the problem. One issue I have now is that what if I want to actually use my CSS file to do some like styling that's specific to this project? So I may use this flex container across all my projects. So in that case, different ones are going to have like different color schemes and all that. So I probably still want to pass a class name to this. Okay, so I should probably edit my flex container component so that way I can pass a class name. Okay, so what we're going to do is I'm going to create a class name prop on the div, and it's going to equal props.className. Okay, so that way I can pass a class name to that flex container. Okay, and so now I can go over here, back to my main, okay, and say header, back in my header, and really the one I want to style first, it's the main one, okay, which is this one. Actually, no, that's the title. So I want to style this one, so I can now give this a class name and make it equal, nav. Okay, and I can use that to style the other things going on here. Okay, so now I can head over to I'll just use my index.css here, and I'll just kind of delete all this code that React comes with. Okay, we're just going to change some things. That's fine. Okay. Now what I'm going to want to do is style that nav a little bit because I just like to give it a border. But again, these are more like specific to this project. Not every project's going to have the same border, same color. So these are things I would define in my CSS. So I'm going to use that as a class. But my inline stuff is because like this is like designed to be reusable. So the stuff that's going to be sort of like always there and rarely change, I have as my defaults because I generally always set up my flex containers like this. And then again, I can override them with the styles prop as far as any inline styles. And then I can pass a class name if I want to use any, like, do any of the more colory type stuff. The stuff that's more specific to the theme of my particular app. Okay, so let me go back to that index.css and start styling that nav. We're going to say I want the border to be 3 pixels solid red. So we can give that a nice border. Let's see how that looks like without the outline. So I click off the outline for a moment. Okay, that's fine. But you see like the logo and the edge of the link there, they're a little tight. So I want to put some padding to kind of make everything a little bit less claustrophobic. So we'll say padding 5 pixels. Okay, again, let me just take out the outline for a moment. Okay, that's a little bit better. Again, you know, you adjust the taste. I'm not here to show like a nice design, more so than show you kind of like how you can approach this, how you can approach this from React. But you notice how, like, I'm just treating this like a normal website. I'm just focusing on what would normally be in that header section of my website and doing that from the header component. And then again, I'm creating these components that can help me create the pieces I'm going to reuse over and over again, like a flexbox. Okay, why recreate the flexbox every time when I can create a container that just does that job for me? Okay, you see that I was able to generate like 3 flexboxes without having to like write a whole bunch of classes and do all that there. Okay, so that makes life a lot easier. Okay, wonderful. Okay, so now let's head over to my main. Okay, now what we'll do with the main is we'll create like your standard like sidebar main area type layout first. Okay, now in this case I'm probably going to want to use a grid so that way I can easily adjust it in a mobile view. Okay, yeah. Okay, so let's see here. And let me think how I would want to do the grid container as a you'd probably have to, I don't know if you could just do a generic grid container. You'd probably want to make specific ones. Okay. Let's see here. Well, let's first just start off in the main area. We could also just use a flexbox, honestly, for this particular layout. So let's just do that. Okay, so head back to main. And really, again, if we're just going to do 2 columns, we really just need a flex container. So I can use flex container again. And again, if I click on this, it'll automatically import it for me because VS Code is awesome like that. Okay, and so that essentially becomes that row for main. And then I would need sort of like my right area and my left area. Okay, so in that case, we would just have two divs. Okay, actually, I won't use the divs because we always generally want to be semantic if possible. So I'm going to use the main tag to represent sort of like the main section, like the bigger column where all the main content would be. And then I'm going to use an aside to represent, you know, the sidebar. Okay. And just so I can style them, I'm going to put a class name on the flex container because I try to use less classes as possible. So I'd rather style that main and the aside relative to this section. Okay, so I'm going to just give this flex container the class name of main. Okay, because it's the main component. And now I can then use that to style everything else. Okay, so what I'll do now is I'm going to head back over to my index.css. And then I can style that main component. So I'll style the container, which is already a flex. But what I want to do is I want to kind of style the 2 containers inside of it. So technically I want to style the main tag that's inside that main, that thing with the main class. Okay, and we're going to say I want that. So this would be the main element that's inside there. I would want to give that a width of, we'll say 60%. Okay, and then just so we can see it visually, let's give it a border. So we'll say again 3 pixels solid blue. Okay, and again if I get rid of the gold outline, so you can see like there's that element. Okay, but right now it has no height, so we'll give it a fixed height just so that way you can see it a little bit better. So we'll give it a height of like 500 pixels. Okay, I'll get rid of the outline for a moment, and like there you go. Okay, cool. Fun. Okay, now let's do the aside dot main aside. Okay, and then we'll say the width of this is 30%. We'll also give this a border of 3 pixels solid pink. And then let's just get rid of this so you can see it. So you can see like there it is. So see, this is taking up 30% of the space. This is taking up 60% of the space. Okay, now when I look at it, I see like this little like this doesn't match up like quite the way I'd like it over here. So this is when I would want to take a look at my outline. So I see my outline, this flex container gets a little bit wider. Okay, now the reason that's going to be is because of the way the box model works. So when I added padding and margin, that wasn't included in the already existing width. By default in CSS, any padding, any margin, or border gets added. So by adding that border, by adding that padding that I added over here, I extended the width. So one way I could fix that is just by giving everything, I do what's called box styling. Okay, box sizing, and then I change this to border box. Okay, and see what that's going to do is that now any border, any margin, any padding that I add doesn't add to the width or the height. It is included in the existing width or height. So that way I don't have to be doing that math in my head. It's like, well, if I add 3 pixels of border, then I'm adding like 6 pixels of width. It's going to take from the existing width that I've already given it. Okay, so I should have probably just done that. So this style I'm going to keep there. This I'll comment out when I'm done, but this I'm generally going to want because it's just to me a much easier way to think through your styling using box size border box. And you see now it lines up a lot nicer. So if I take out the outline, okay, you can see like, hey, like this is box here, and then that box there. And so I got my 2 columns because again, this is a flex container, and I put 2 divs in there, and they're going to line up as a row because it's a flex container. So if I go back to my main, you can see here I just have my 2 things, and then probably what I would do is I create a component with my content here. Okay, or I'll create this as a separate component and make this a component, and then just inject the 2 components there, however you want to do it. Okay, but you're trying to see kind of like how I'm doing this. Okay, what I could do is I could set up those components now, so I could be like, so over here in layout, I would say like new file. We'll call this like, since we already have like a main component, we'll call this main content.js and main new file main sidebar.js. Okay, and then we'll just kind of go for the footer, copy that because that's still in the boilerplate stage, and then do this. And again, I'm going to want this to be a main because that's kind of how we styled things so far. And again, this is the main content. So main, main, main content. Yeah, I'll just write main content here. And then do the same thing with main sidebar. And again, that's supposed to be an aside. So change that to an aside. And again, asides and main and nav and header, footer, section, they're literally just glorified divs. They're called semantic tags. So they don't do anything different than what a div does. It's just they have like semantic meaning. So like when a search engine's reading your HTML and they see a section tag, they realize like this is a section, like this is a subdivision of the page that has a little bit more meaning. Like when I see header, the search engine crawler knows that this is the top of it, like your generally probably your navigation and your footer. Like it just allows it to have semantic meaning to what the different sections of your page are. Um, Also, just makes it easy for a person who's reading your code to know what the purpose of different sections of your page are when you use the semantic tags that are built into HTML. But theoretically, you could do the same thing by just using divs with class names that are descriptive. But generally, it's good practice to use those semantic tags. Okay, because they're there to help facilitate better search engine results. Okay, so main sidebar here. Okay, now let's see here. Those are all good. So I'm going to head back to the main tag here. And let's import those. Import main content. Import main sidebar. And then I'm going to replace this with main content. And you see how I'm doing this in the sense that basically I keep breaking things down to their components because the idea is you don't really want one component doing too much. This is much easier for me to read because when I look at this, I realize, okay, there's a flex container with the content and the sidebar, and then I can go drive deeper into that specific component that has the piece that I'm really trying to edit. Also, again, when you're working on a team, having everything broken up into a lot of smaller components, you're less likely to have multiple team members working in the same file. Okay, so one is just going to be better organized. It can become overkill. Like you could end up breaking this up stuff so much that it becomes hard to kind of wade through all this. But I generally think you're gonna be better off breaking it up more granularly than having too much going on in one component. Okay, but as you can see, we have like this it's looking like a website. Okay, and now we can do the same thing with a footer. So I head over to the footer. I will go make that a flex container. There we go. And then when you think of like a footer, you imagine like that three columns of links kind of thing going on at the bottom. So we're gonna say we have 3 divs in there. Okay, and then we're gonna give this container class name of, footer. So I can style it in my CSS. So I'll go down here. Okay. And footer. What do I want to do here? Well, I want the footer itself to have a border. So let's give the footer a border of 3 pixels solid green. Okay, so we're seeing it show up, but again, it doesn't have any height yet, so let's give it some height. Let's give it a height of 300 pixels. Okay, well, maybe that's made too much. Let's give it 200. Yeah, it's a little bit better. Okay, and now we want each of those divs that are inside the footer. Div, well, would be dot footer, a div that's inside the footer. Okay, and each of those divs should have a border of 2 pixels solid purple. And again, I'm just using different colors so you can kind of help identify like, hey, this style belonged to that. Okay, and again, I can always take off the outline but again, the outline just helps me see things when I need to, so I can see how everything's like falling relative to each other. Okay, and then each of these divs should take up about width should take about 25% because we want all 3 of them kind of like to the side of each other. So see, there you go. You have your 3 sort of columns. Let me just kind of get rid of DevTools for a moment so you can kind of see how, like the kind of the design there. Let me comment out the outline for a moment. So I'll comment out the outline. and you can see like there's like the general idea. You can imagine like the three sort of columns. Like if you take a look at a website, like let's go to like a Zappos. Actually, I haven't been to Mashable in a long time. Let's check out how Mashable's doing. If I stretch this out, and if I go to the bottom where you see the footer, you see something like that. Let me see if I think of another one that has like more of that 3-column footer. Let's try Zappos.com. Usually e-commerce sites always have that. If I scroll to the bottom, yeah, so you see this is what I mean. So you see like those three, like I could have made it 4 columns if I had 4 divs, but you see like there's these columns. So that's what you're kind of seeing down here. Okay. Now, of course, again, you would add the content, you do more styling to kind of get the right fonts, the right colors, the right spacing, but you're starting to see like how this kind of all builds out. Okay, and then like here, well, in this case, this is set up a little bit differently, but you can imagine those sites where generally you have like that main area. So like go to any blog site, let me think here, like a dev.to, if I'm looking at a blog here, so just open up a random blog, you see like I have this main content area and then there's like the side. There's a little bit extra going on here because this little thin column here, but the idea is you're seeing main area sidebar. So we're getting that kind of, and then there's like our navigation, like that top bar, which would be sort of like this. Okay, so you're just kind of seeing like the general sketch out of things. Okay, and again, I could get rid of the title of the website and just rely on the logo if I wanted to. And I have like the logo over here, which again, you kind of see how that's done over here. So you see like, hey, like there's the dev here. So technically, probably this is probably the logo and the search bar probably in their own Flex container. These 3 things are in their own Flex container, which are on top of a bigger Flex container, and using space in between, they push them to the 2 sides. In the same way that we push the links over here to the right and the logo to the left. That's generally how you can get that effect. I mean, you could also use like a little grid, but you know, that's the cool thing about like Flex containers is that they're very reusable. Like a Flex container, you can just kind of create rows wherever you need to, which is why I oftentimes just use Flex for everything. Just because it's really robust and really easy, they just really composable. But yeah, so you see like how we kind of created that layout using the CSS and how we broke things up into individual like components. So there's certain components I have that represent the different sections of my pages, but then I have certain components that represent sort of like units of sort of like styling that I'm going to be certain elements that I'm going to kind of use the same way over and over again. So that's sort of like utility styled components. There is a library called styled components that lets you build components for that exact purpose. But again, this shows you how to do it. If you don't want to install another library, you just want to do it built into React, this is generally how you'd build like those pre-styled components. You have your default styling, which we pass in as like just your styles object, but then we can merge in any styles that the user passes in through some prop. It doesn't have to be styles; it can be whatever prop you want to use. But style or styles is probably going to be the way to go. I probably ideally would even be style because most users are going to intuitively think that they could pass a style prop to something. Yeah, so there you can kind of see the general gist of like setting up layouts, or at least one approach, one way to kind of think about how you're breaking up your React app. Trying to think if there's any other small things I'd like to do now. But again, I have plenty of videos on CSS. You can always find all my other stuff over there at grokoverflow.com. So if you head over to grokoverflow.com, you can find my blogs, but you can also head over to videos and see you can find this playlist right here, Styling with CSS. And there is a lot of videos where I go over a lot of different situations and how you could use CSS to do certain things. All really geared towards like a very early on beginner. So again, I would probably hit up someone like Kevin Powell for like really advanced levels of CSS. But if you're just starting out and just trying to really kind of wrap your head around a lot of the CSS stuff, a lot of these videos are really going to help you think about that. But with that, I will see you all in the next video. Have a great day and enjoy.